Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're going deep inside, exploring the most complex organ in the universe, your brain.
It's going to be a fascinating journey, that's for sure.
Oh, absolutely. We've got some amazing sources lined up. Fear, pleasure, memory, even a glimpse into the minds of psychopaths. We're covering it all.
Plus, some cutting-edge research that's really pushing the boundaries of what we know about the brain. Its potential is just incredible.
It feels like we're on the verge of a whole new level of human understanding. So for this deep dive, we're taking you on a journey through the inner workings of your brain, exploring its capabilities, and hopefully uncovering a few surprises along the way.
I think a good place to start would be with the concept of the brain as an old house.
Oh, I like that. An old house.
Yeah, different areas evolved at different times, each with its own function.
Okay, so tell me more about this old house. Where do we begin?
Well, picture the brainstem as the basement. It's the oldest part of the house, responsible for basic survival functions, breathing, heart rate, that sort of thing.
Right, the essentials.
Exactly. Then, as we move up to the first floor, we find the limbic system. This is where emotions, like fear, come into play.
Ah, the limbic system. And that's where the amygdala is, right? That little almond-shaped structure often called the brain's panic button.
Exactly. The amygdala is constantly scanning our environment, looking for potential threats. And when it spots something dangerous, it triggers a rapid cascade of responses in our bodies. Heart rate speeds up, breathing too. Muscles tense, maybe you start sweating. All those classic fight or flight symptoms.
It's like that feeling when you're walking alone at night and you hear a noise, right? Your whole body just goes on high alert before you even have time to process what's happening.
Precisely. But here's the interesting part. We can actually learn to control that fear response.
Really?
Our sources describe this intense training that Navy SEALs undergo. They're constantly pushed to their limits, facing these simulated combat situations, extreme physical challenges.
Wow, so they're basically training their brains to stay calm and focused in incredibly stressful conditions.
Exactly. They're learning to override those instinctive, amygdala-driven reactions. They tap into the power of the prefrontal cortex, the second floor of our brain house, so to speak.
The prefrontal cortex. Now that's fascinating. It's like the executive control center of the brain, right? Helping us make rational decisions, plan, resist those impulsive urges.
That's a great way to put it. And the SEALs, through their training, are essentially strengthening the connections between their prefrontal cortex and their limbic system. They're learning to manage fear and make those clear-headed decisions, even in utter chaos.
Makes you wonder if we could all benefit from a little bit of that SEAL training. Maybe not the jumping out of helicopters part, but the mental resilience aspect for sure.
I think there are definitely lessons to be learned there about how to approach fear and stress. But let's move on to another powerful force that drives us, the pursuit of pleasure. And at the center of that is a neurotransmitter called dopamine.
Dopamine, right. The brain's reward system.
It's often oversimplified as the pleasure chemical. But dopamine's role is actually much more nuanced. It's involved in motivation, reward prediction, even learning, and habit formation.
So it's not just about feeling good. It's about wanting, anticipating, even maybe becoming a little addicted to those things that give us that dopamine rush.
Exactly. And to show just how powerful dopamine can be, our sources actually looked at brain imaging studies of activity during orgasm.
Wait, they studied brain activity during orgasm. That's a
Okay.
deep dive if I've ever heard one.
It was groundbreaking research. What they found were some fascinating differences between male and female brain activity. For men, there was a massive surge of activity in the brainstem, the area that controls dopamine release, and at the same time, a decrease in activity in areas linked to anxiety.
So basically, men's brains are going all in on pleasure and just shutting down worries during orgasm. Makes sense. What about women?
Well, for women, while there are similarities, there's also this phenomenon where several areas of the brain actually quiet down during orgasm. This includes regions involved in anxiety, fear, even self-awareness.
So it's not just about a surge of pleasure. It's almost like a quieting of certain brain regions, a letting go of anxieties and inhibitions.
Exactly. And that raises all sorts of questions about the evolutionary roots of these differences.
I'm dying to hear more about that. But first, what about those thrill seekers, the people who get a rush from pushing their limits? Our sources mentioned base jumping. How does dopamine fit into that?
Base jumping is a perfect example of how dopamine can fuel risky behavior. The anticipation of the jump, the free fall, that rush of landing safely, all of those trigger a massive surge of dopamine. It creates an incredibly powerful and, for some, addictive experience.
So their brains are wired to get this supercharged dose of reward from those intense adrenaline-pumping activities.
Yeah.
But why do some people crave that kind of extreme risk more than others? Is it all about how sensitive they are to dopamine?
That's one theory. Some researchers believe those individual differences in dopamine sensitivity might be key. Some people's brains just experience a much more intense dopamine rush from risky behavior, making them more likely to seek out those thrilling experiences.
So it's like they have a higher risk thermostat, their brains crave that dopamine hit, and they find it in ways that most of us would find, well, terrifying.
It really is a fascinating interplay of brain chemistry and individual experience. It's amazing how those individual differences can really shape us, the experiences we seek out, our personalities. And speaking of unique brain wiring, let's shift gears to the incredible world of memory.
Memory. It's one of those things we take for granted until it starts to fail us.
Absolutely, and it's far more complex than we often think. It's not just storing files like a computer. It's a whole dynamic network spread throughout the brain.
It's mind-boggling how much information our brains can store. I remember reading that the capacity is something like 10 trillion bytes. That's like having a hard drive the size of the Milky Way.
It's awe-inspiring. And to show just how diverse memory can be, our sources highlighted two really interesting cases. On one hand, you have Stephen Wiltshire, the artist. He has this almost unbelievable photographic memory.
Oh, Wiltshire's work is phenomenal. He recreates these intricate cityscapes and with incredible detail after seeing them just once. Like he's taking a mental snapshot and then painstakingly painting it from memory.
His case suggests a highly developed visual memory system, maybe even a unique way of encoding and retrieving information. But then on the other end of the spectrum, there's the tragic case of Clive Waring.
Clive Waring, the man with what they call the worst case of amnesia in the world. His story is just heartbreaking, but so illuminating about how memory works.
Waring suffered damage to his hippocampus, a brain region that's crucial for forming new memories. He's trapped in a perpetual present, unable to retain new information for more than a few seconds.
So while Wiltshire shows us the incredible power of memory, Waring's case highlights how fragile it can be. The hippocampus is essential for our sense of self, even for just navigating the world.
It really underscores that point. And it also shows us that memory isn't just one thing. It's a collection of systems, each with its own function and location in the brain.
Right. We have short-term memory, long-term memory, procedural memory for skills, and episodic memory for those personal experiences. It's like a tapestry woven together to create our life story.
That's a beautiful way to put it. But now let's delve into a bit of a darker corner of the brain. Our sources explored what makes some brains predisposed to, well, evil, the nature of psychopathy.
Psychopathy, always a chilling topic, but fascinating nonetheless. Is there something fundamentally different about the brains of psychopaths? Is it nature, nurture? What's the story?
The million-dollar question. And it's one researchers are still trying to fully understand. Our sources do point to some compelling evidence that there are structural and functional differences in the brains of people with psychopathy.
Like reduced activity in the amygdala, which we talked about earlier, the part that processes emotions like fear and empathy. So it's like their brains aren't registering the emotional weight of their actions the same way.
Precisely. They might understand intellectually that their actions cause pain, but they don't feel that pain themselves. There's this disconnect between their understanding and their emotional response.
And there was also mention of potential impairments in the frontal lobes, the area we talked about as being responsible for impulse control, planning, and moral reasoning.
Exactly. So combine a blunted emotional response with poor impulse control and a lack of empathy, and it's a dangerous mix.
They use Ted Bundy as an example, classic psychopath.
Yeah.
Charming, intelligent, but utterly ruthless. No remorse for his crimes.
Bundy and those brain imaging studies we mentioned suggest a strong biological component to psychopathy. But the nature versus nurture debate is complex.
Right. It's likely a combination of genetics and environment that contribute to the development of psychopathy. And even among those diagnosed, there's a huge range in behavior and outcomes.
That's a crucial point. Not every person with psychopathic traits becomes a serial killer. Some may channel their brain wiring into successful careers, even in business or politics.
That's a chilling thought. A fine line between a brilliant strategist and a cold-hearted manipulator. But let's move away from the darker side and explore the cutting edge of brain research. Our sources talked about some incredible advancements that could totally revolutionize how we understand and interact with the brain.
Now, this is where it gets really exciting. We're talking technologies that could enhance our cognitive function, treat neurological disorders, even blur the lines between the human brain and machines.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's becoming more real every day. They mentioned DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and their investment in brain-enhancing technologies.
DARPA's focus is on augmenting human capabilities, especially for soldiers. They're looking into everything from drugs that boost memory to brain stimulation techniques that could improve focus and reaction time.
They highlighted these drugs called amphicynes. They enhance glutamate activity, a neurotransmitter involved in learning and memory. Imagine soldiers staying sharp and focused for days, processing information at incredible speeds.
And the applications go way beyond the military. These drugs could potentially treat cognitive decline in Alzheimer's, or help students learn languages more quickly, or master complex skills.
It's exciting, but also a little unnerving to think about those possibilities. And then there's the whole world of brain-computer interfaces, where thoughts can control devices. They mentioned monkeys controlling robotic limbs just by thinking.
That's just the beginning. Imagine a future where paralysis can be overcome, where we can communicate telepathically, maybe even upload our consciousness into a digital world.
Mind-blowing. But with that kind of power comes a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
Ethical implications, ensuring equitable access, preventing these technologies from falling into the wrong hands. It's a lot to consider.
Absolutely. It's a conversation we need to have now before these technologies advance beyond our control.
We need to be thoughtful about how we develop and use these tools. But the potential to alleviate suffering, unlock human potential, push the boundaries of what's possible, it's too important to ignore. It feels like we're at the dawn of a whole new era of brain exploration, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We're finally starting to crack the code of the most complex machine in the known universe, you know?
And yet, the more we learn, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
That's the beauty of neuroscience, isn't it? There's always another layer to peel back, another mystery to solve. It keeps us pushing the boundaries, searching for that deeper understanding.
It makes you wonder what incredible discoveries are still waiting out there.
Oh, I have no doubt that we've only just begun to scratch the surface of what the human brain is capable of.
Speaking of pushing boundaries, our sources also touched on something I found particularly interesting. Psychic phenomena, or ESP.
Ah, yes. The realm where science and the paranormal intersect.
Mainstream science has, traditionally, been quite skeptical of ESP. But there are some researchers who are starting to take these claims more seriously, aren't there?
That's right. They argue that our understanding of the brain is still so young, so limited, that there might be untapped potentials we haven't even begun to consider.
Like we might have barely scratched the surface of what the human mind can really do.
Exactly. And our sources point to the sheer volume of anecdotal accounts. People who claim to have experienced things like telepathy, precognition, other psychic abilities.
Of course, anecdotes aren't scientific evidence, but they can be a starting point for investigation, can't they?
Absolutely. Some researchers are using brain imaging techniques to study people who claim to have these abilities, looking for neural patterns that might correlate with their experiences.
Fascinating.
They're also conducting rigorously controlled experiments, trying to rule out any other explanations, things like coincidence or even fraud.
It's certainly a controversial area of research.
Oh, definitely. But I think some scientists feel it's important to keep an open mind, explore every possibility, no matter how unconventional.
After all, history is full of breakthroughs that came from challenging the status quo, right? Venturing into uncharted territory.
Exactly. Who knows, maybe one day we'll discover that the human brain is capable of far more than we ever imagined.
Well, this deep dive has certainly been a mind-expanding journey, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've covered so much ground, from the fundamentals of how our brains work to those incredible possibilities of brain enhancement, even dipping our toes into the mysteries of ESP.
It's been quite a ride. And for those of you listening, we hope this has sparked your own curiosity, inspired you to keep exploring the amazing world inside your own head.
Keep questioning, keep learning, and never stop pushing the boundaries of what you believe is possible.
Because the journey into the human mind, it's just beginning. Who knows what incredible discoveries still await us?